Well, so by show of hands, who here has heard of Pokemon Go? Okay, so quite a few. Who here has played Pokemon Go? Probably fewer. Couple back there. Who is playing Pokemon Go right now during the sermonette? Okay, no hands, so that's good. Well, for those that haven't seen or heard of it, let me try to catch you up a little bit. So Pokemon Go is a free-to-play, location-based, augmented reality mobile game. What? All right, Pokemon Go, it's a game on your phone, okay? The game allows players to capture, battle, and train virtual creatures called Pokemon. So they appear on your device screens as though in the real world. This is called augmented reality, or AR for short. It uses your phone's GPS and camera to figure out where you are in the real world, and then it overlays the game world on top of that. So when you're walking around the streets of Houston, your avatar moves inside the game. So Pokemon Go has quickly elevated itself to the most used phone app after launching just a few short weeks ago, surpassing the previous record held by everyone's favorite Candy Crush Saga. Sweet. As of last week, there were 21 million daily active users, a staggering number, more than Snapchat, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. The game has been credited with popularizing augmented reality and was praised by some medical professionals for potentially improving the mental and physical health of the gamers. But it also attracted some controversy due to reports of causing accidents and being a public nuisance at some locations. You know, the typical stuff, people walking into traffic, people falling off cliffs, usual stuff. So even so, augmented reality has been up and coming. In 2015, Microsoft released HoloLens. In 2013, Google released Google Glass. In 1990, the term augmented reality is attributed to Thomas P. Caudell, who was a former Boeing researcher. But it turns out it's not really that new of an idea. Lyman Frank Baum, or maybe you know him better by his pen name, L. Frank Baum, he was an American author chiefly known for The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. Well, way back in 1901, he first mentions the idea in one of his books, the idea of spectacles, or what today we call glasses, that overlay objects onto real life, in this case people, and he called it the character marker, augmented reality. So this got me thinking. With augmented reality on a sharp rise, it got me thinking about augmented reality versus reality. Specifically in the context what I want to talk about today, it got me thinking about the difference between Satan's version of reality versus the truth, the reality of God's way. This contrast is also known as the way of man versus the way of God, or we've heard it called the two trees, or we've even heard it in the past called the way of get versus the way of give. Whatever analogy you come up with, the fact is that Satan has his own version of reality. And his version of reality can be quite subtle. I mean, if Satan showed up in front of you, scaly, red, bifurcated tail, carrying a hay fork, it's kind of obvious, right? He's not that obvious. Satan's version of reality can take a bunch of different forms. And if we're not mindful of them, if we don't review some of these things periodically, then we can slowly be lured into believing Satan's version of reality, the counterfeit reality. So let's quickly explore a few of these and see how they contrast with the perception of the truth, how they contrast the reality of God's way. So Satan wants us to think that we are alone in this world. When we have a feeling of loneliness, it can soon turn to feelings of helplessness, depression, and it's at that time we can find ourselves susceptible. But when you have people that care about you, and in turn you have people that you care about, your mind is filled with hope, and you have a positive outlook. Mr. Servideo gave a message several months back that talked to this issue specifically. Sometimes people can get caught up in a downward spiral that they cannot find their way out of. They feel like they're utterly alone. And that's not the case. That's never the case. You are not alone. In Hebrews 13:5, it says that God will never leave us or forsake us. But that's actually a reference back to Deuteronomy 31. So let's go there. Deuteronomy 31. To set the stage here, Moses is telling the people of Israel that he will not be entering the promised land. And the people are troubled, right? Their leader has just told them that he is not coming with them. Think about what's going through their head. Think of everything they had witnessed from Moses. Let's pick it up in Deuteronomy 31, verse 7. Deuteronomy 31, verse 7. Then Moses summoned Joshua and said to him in the presence of all Israel, "Be strong and courageous, for you must go with this people into the land that the Lord swore to their ancestors to give them. And you must divide it among them as their inheritance." Verse 8. The Lord himself goes before you and will be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. Not only is God with us, but we're told that we're part of something bigger. Part of the body. We all have something in common here today. We congregate as a body to worship God. And it's a good and right thing to do. It shows God that we care about something more than just ourselves. It shows God that we care about our brothers and our sisters. It shows God that we care about Him. Can the body come to worship God without the feet? Can the body come to God to worship without the hands? It's impossible. The only way the body can come together to worship, the only way is if we are one. Are we one? Or do we think we are all alone in this world? Do you believe Satan's augmented reality? Or do you believe God? Satan wants us to believe we are all alone. And another one. Satan wants us to think that we can rely on ourselves. He wants us to believe that mankind has the answer. His version of reality wants to minimize our reliance on God. His version wants us to think that if we are smart enough, if we work hard enough, then all things will be within our grasps. We have all the right answers, right? Let's turn to Romans 12:3. Romans 12, verse 3. For by the grace given me, I say to every one of you, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment in accordance with the faith God has distributed to each of you. And then tying into our previous point, verse 4 goes on to say, for just as each of us has one body with many members, and these members do not all have the same function, so in Christ we, though many, form one body, and each member belongs to all the others, we have different gifts according to the grace given to each of us. If your gift is prophesying, then prophesy in accordance with your faith. If it's serving, then serve. If it's teaching, then teach. If it's to encourage, then give encouragement. If it's giving, then give generously. And if it's to lead, do it diligently. And if it's to show mercy, do it cheerfully. Do what you have an aptitude to do. That is the gift that God has given us. It's the gift that God has given you. And it says here to think, not to think of yourselves too highly. It says to think of ourselves with sober judgment, not thinking higher than we should. So do you think that describes the world today? I mean, it was mentioned in the opening prayer, right? Today, we are sandwiched between the Republican National Convention and the Democratic National Convention. Two circuses, right? So both parties think they have the answer. Both parties say whatever they can to get your vote. Remember famous lines like these. We will declare war on poverty. Does anybody remember which president said that? President Kennedy. We will end our dependence on foreign oil. Anybody know that one? It's earlier than you think. 1978, President Carter. Read my lips, no new taxes. President George H.W. Bush. And in my first year as president, we will close Guantanamo Bay. It's obviously President Obama. He's dismantled it a lot, but hasn't closed it. So I'm not saying that these presidents didn't believe in what they were saying, but they actually thought that they had the power to do these things. They think that it's up to mankind to solve all these problems. Satan is distorting our vision. Satan wants us to think that we can fix these things. He wants us to think that we can rely on ourselves. Let's quickly look at one more. Satan wants us to doubt God. He wants us to doubt God. In the Garden of Eden, what did the serpent say to Eve? Did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden? And then Eve corrected the serpent and explained that God said they could eat from any tree except the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, or they would die. And then the serpent said, you will not surely die. For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. So pausing there, Eve must have stopped and thought about that. It cast doubt on what God had commanded her and Adam. So, well, here's this talking snake, and, he seems to know a lot about these trees, and, there's probably nothing wrong with knowing right from wrong, right? Well, she didn't keep her focus on God's reality. And don't turn there, but in John 8:44, Jesus says the devil was a murderer from the beginning. He does not stand in the truth because there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks according to his own nature. He is a liar and the father of lies. Commentator Micah Jones stated the following. According to a Barna poll, 60% of American Christians believe that Satan is just a symbol of evil, not a real spiritual being. So that statistic is kind of amazing. What it tells you is that the majority of Christians do not believe in the Bible. And what does that tell us? It tells us that most people, since they don't believe there's an actual being named Satan, they will let their guard down. They will look through their own augmented reality. And you know what? That's just fine with Satan, right? Because guess what? If you're looking through your own augmented reality, then you're not looking at God's reality. And that's just fine by him. Satan wants to cast doubt on God's reality. He wants us to doubt God. He wants us to buy into this false reality. So in conclusion, augmented reality It changes our view of the real world. Whether it be with games like Pokemon Go or apps like Snapchat or Facebook, with all the technology in our lives today, it's growing easier by the day to disconnect from reality. Easier to get distracted, easier to get sidetracked, easier to lose focus on what is important. It's easier to focus on all the wrong things, the false version of reality. And I hope that you realize here, I'm not really talking about technology. I'm talking about anything that we let get between ourselves and God's way. Anything that augments how we perceive God's way. Anything that gets between us and God, that's the reality that Satan wants us to buy into. He wants that version of reality to replace God's version, the truth. He wants to foster and grow the counterfeit vision so that we lose sight of our goal, becoming first fruits. And the world has by and large bought into this counterfeit vision. I couldn't help but think of Isaiah 5:20 when it seems to sum up where we find ourselves today. So let's wrap up that by turning there. Isaiah 5, verse 20. Isaiah 5:20. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness. Mankind has lost the ability to think and reason soundly. He has lost sight of the way to peace and happiness. This is describing a time when everyone is doing the exact opposite of God's way. You don't have to look too far to see this. I mean, in this country, we have people that don't even know which bathroom to use. Does that sound like sound judgment? This way, the way of the world around us, it's incongruent with God's way. So, brethren, be watchful. Don't be fooled into believing the false sense of reality, the counterfeit reality, Satan's augmented reality. Make sure you're looking at the one and only true reality, God's way.